Here it is, the definitive list of the top 8 most influential grand pianos of the 20th century. You may think this is our opinion, but this is truth. These are hard facts, and here are their stories.
Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center in beautiful downtown San Antonio, Texas.
And I'm Patrick Maury. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our other YouTube channels, check out our other videos, sign up for notifications, like our videos, leave us comments. We really appreciate the support and we love to interact with you guys. Well, Ted, this is it. This is the list.
The most influential pianos of the grand pianos
of the 20th century. And it's a mouthful, but I feel like this is, and you were talking about this earlier, but we have a blessing to be in.
We do, and part of it is that, well, we need to kind of use collegiate rules and say how this list came about, because we carved out all 9-foot concert grand pianos. They're not included. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, there's all these exceptions, which sounds like we made it up in a bar, but there's no concert grand pianos included. Mm-hmm. So we're going to name the ones that we're cutting out. And so if it's not a dream concert grand piano, what are the most influential pianos of the last 100 years or the 20th century? Mm-hmm. And so we go around and everyone throws in their 2 bits in their opinion. But what's fascinating is, like I said, when it comes to putting these kind of compilation lists together for the store, everything's like it happened yesterday. And we've been here since the late 20s, and everyone still remembers certain pianos that came in. And it's like it was yesterday. And the minute you say, hey, what was your favorite piano? You remember that one that came in from the church? And that's like it happened yesterday.
And it was like 5 years ago, but it was like, yeah, it was just here in the back.
15 or 20 years ago. That's the scary part, is when you find out it was just here in the back. That was 8 years ago. So that's where this idea comes from.
And so we did exclude 9-foots from this list because we were like, that's for a concert hall. And yes, a lot of great stories have happened on 9-foot pianos, but this is pianos that really took, I would say, musicians to the next level, that took artists to the next level when it comes to recording artists. These were the pianos that I think shaped, at least here in America, shaped the American piano industry in the 20th century. And so we also are excluding very recent pianos and new technology in pianos because we feel like the splash is just now happening for those. And so we some of that modern technology, if you've seen an X at the end of some models, we've left that off. Or, we wanted to kind of honor what the 20th century had to bring to us. And so I think right off the bat, we're going to start with the Steinway Model B. And I think it's like undisputed. This is kind of the piano.
Well, that would be the one that I think it's at the top of the list for a number of reasons. Mm-hmm. But number one, at the beginning of the century in 1900, that instrument in its model case was already 22 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So the Model B, the original one, was 22 years old around 1900, even though for the last, at that time, 8-9 years, they were 85 key pianos. So it became an 88 key piano in the 1890s. Mm-hmm. And so they had about an 8 or 9 year run as an 88 key piano before the turn of the century came on, which it matches up with some of the other ones that were invented a little bit later and came along. But going into the 20th century, that's the only one I believe that's on the list that was around at that time. Yeah,
and so in your opinion, who or why would the Steinway Model B be like it's almost on a pedestal. It's like the instrument that a lot of people seek out. A lot of people are like, oh, okay, if I had the money one day, I would have a B. What about that scale design? What about that size? What about that sound do people love?
There's some kind of magic that occurs right around the 7-foot range. Mm-hmm. And I think if you do it in
different manufacturers make
different, and some of them use sizes. Metric systems. Okay, mm-hmm. So for the last 20 years, metric has gotten a lot more popular, but toward the last 25 years, or the last quarter of the last century, a lot of them were just now starting to get imported. So mm-hmm. Most of the import pianos to the United States are in metric, and a lot of the ones that were made here that are on the list, and ones are measured in feet or inches. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, but around the 7-foot range is where you get the balance of the scale for a 7¼ inch scaled instrument. So it's got 7¼ octaves on it. And so I'm not saying it allows a foot per octave, but the pianos are balanced in that range. And a Steinway B, along with the other 7-foot pianos that you notice that we have on the list, are all going to balance that way. The treble section is supposed to be nice and champagne glassy and singing. The middle's supposed to have power, and the bottom's supposed to have a raging thunder if you want it, and have a nice filling bass section.
And a lot of people, like that was it was the piano to play on, the Steinway Model B, and it's still highly sought after, very expensive. You can get them new, you can get them used.
Still make them.
And just, so that's our top of the list, Steinway Model B. Going to number 2, this one you can't get as easily because you're gonna have to find it used. But this is a Baldwin. It's an SF10.
It's their 7-foot scale piano, and we seem like we almost always had one here, at least up until the early 2000s in the store. Loved it a lot. I always liked the SF10 because it's a 7-foot scale piano, and next to a Steinway B, it holds its own. I mean, those were the two. I mean, a number of Baldwin artists had specific SF10s made for them for touring. Usually the manufacturer would make 2 or 3 and let them come in and pick. Yeah. And
it wasn't as pricey as the Steinway, but it had its own characteristics.
For a while they were really neck and neck because the plates were made in the same foundry. And they were on those models they used the Renner hammers and the Renner action. So the differences really were the wood frame, and they used the same kind of, hard rock maple alternated with a different veneer of hard rock maple, and I'm forgetting the other one they used to put on there. I think it was birch, okay? And that would make a solid rim, the same thing that they used at Steinway, they used at Baldwin. Those pianos were always compared to one another.
And whenever we get them nowadays, it's like people seek them out. And so it's like the SF10 and then the SD10, which is their 9-foot, which we're not putting on the list, but those are like, right when we get them in, take pictures, contacted from Chicago or Florida or from New York. And people are trying to get it immediately because there's just not a lot of them anymore.
There's a bigger attraction to an older used piano that is made like new than a brand new piano.
Yeah.
And those are the pianos that really attract the specific interest of certain players.
And so they still hold their value very well, but just incredible instruments, a lot of power, a lot of... it was just, those are our 2 favorite 7-footers that are definitely on this list. But then we go to, I would say, one of the best sellers. It still is one of the best sellers on the used market, but the Yamaha C3.
Both new and used, yeah.
Well, so the new model is the C3X, and so we're excluding that from this list, but the C3 in general is very sought after. And you can seem to find them, in the range of, if it's beat up and a little bit lesser, it's in the $10,000 range, and it goes all the way up to about 18 to 20. More modern ones are, of course, double that price for a new one and stuff like that, at least. But it's just the C3. And I lived in Nashville for a couple years, and it's kind of funny. You go to different recording studios and you see, hey, they have a C3 here. Oh, they have a C3 here. They have a C3 here. And then our best seller out of used pianos, C3, C3,
C3. Ask you
this,
when you're in Nashville and you're noticing these C3s, it's always something when you go to a studio and you see that piano there, and then the first thing you want to recollect and recall is, what recordings have I heard? What song has been on the radio where it's that instrument right there? And the one that you hear the most when you go there and you look at it in the studio, it's always a letdown. You find out, oh, it said Yamaha C3 on the album. I didn't know it was a 40-year-old C3. And the other studio down the street advertising they have a C3, it's brand new. And it doesn't sound the same as the one that you heard on all the recordings. And so during the mid to late 60s up through the early to mid 70s, Yamaha was probably recorded a lot because it was one of the most affordable grand pianos that a new studio could afford, have money for, and use. So if you think about the growth of the studio industry from, say, 1968 to about 1978, everyone wanted in on the music business, and you had to set up and have a grand piano in there. And a lot of them were C3s.
Yeah, no, and today there's still a whole bunch of C3s. It's kind of like the workhorse of, I would say, of grands. It's a 6'1", so a little bit smaller than the other two that we've talked about on this list. But just a great sounding instrument, very, very highly sought after. Teachers love them. Advanced students are like, hey, I have room for a 6-foot piano in my house. I'm looking at the C3.
The next piano that I played about as much as I've played on C3s, because C3s are popular in the restaurant and the bar business and also in the cruise industry. So when you get on board a large cruise ship, look at the grand piano that's in the piano lounge or in the main lounge, and you'll probably find one of these that we're talking about. Unless, of course, it's a brand new. But if you think back on old cruises and what they had, C3s are very popular on cruise. That's a big cruise ship piano.
Yeah.
Because it's in that range of 6 to 7 foot. And it has a great visual attraction and great appearance, and they play and sound wonderful.
Yeah, so the C3, but then the next one we're going to be talking about is Kawai's, I would say their sweet spot, which is, it's going to be the smallest piano that we've talked about so far on this list, but the KG2.
I've played about as many KG2s in venues as I have C3s. And the KG2s always seem to be in places that have more players. In other words, the pianos are there longer. They are rotating a lot of players, which means that the piano's getting beat up. And the KG2 and also the KG3s, there was quite a few of those around as well, because they were, again, very inexpensive and moderately priced from that time frame, 60s through the 70s.
Yeah, and I would say both the C3 and the KG2 are talked about as having, for the size, one of the best scale designs and full sounds from, like you said, you want to have a very present bass, but you also want clarity up on the top end. And when we get both the C3 and the KG2, they sell very similar price points, and they just have such a following. And they're like, okay, well, these are always on the top 5 list of great investments, great pieces to purchase. And you see a good amount of them because there's been so many of them sold over the years.
The KG2s, I think, along with one of the other pianos we have mentioned in here, is probably, in my personal experience of all the years of playing, all in the Southeast and around here in Texas and up in the Northeast, the most abused of all pianos I've ever seen. Have you seen the KG2?
It can take it, yeah.
They squeeze the life out of those things before they actually get around to replacing.
Incredibly built to sustain a lot of that. So if we're keeping track, we have the Steinway Model B at the top. We've got the Baldwin SF10. Then we have the Yamaha C3, the Kawai KG2. And then next is our smallest on the list, tied for smallest. But the Mason Hamlin Model A, which is talked about as the loudest, most full-sounding baby grand that you can buy.
And it's also probably the most prevalent Mason Hamlin model that you're going to encounter, because they were expensive pianos almost entirely through the last century. They were expensive since inception, and they were also one of the oldest manufacturers. I may have been wrong at the beginning. I think they had the Model A at the turn of the century, around 1900.
Oh, yeah.
I think they did have that. But I was thinking mostly in terms of 7-footers. The Model A was around as well.
Yeah, so the Mason Model A it's a 5/8, and it's one of the most full-sounding instruments that anyone's ever played. And they had a really neat story on what made the Mason & Hamlin a Mason & Hamlin and what kept the soundboard curved after all these years. And they had patents for it.
Right.
And you look underneath, you crawl underneath the piano, and it almost looks like it's a big brass thing, but it's got like spider legs coming out of it. It's a circle, and it's holding the soundboard curved.
It's like the spokes on the wheel of a wagon.
Yeah,
wheel.
Exactly.
And supposedly it keeps the frame in the exact same spot so it never moves.
Because it's just going to have the sound's going to...
They have a patent on it, and I forgot what they call it. Tension rod.
A tension rod.
A tension rod. And I remember when I first started working here, I was familiar with the tension rods on Mason Hamlins, and that's one of the first questions I asked your grandfather. Hey, man, he goes, everyone's got a patent on everything, but he said, I'll tell you what, no matter how old the Mason Hamlins come in, they never seem to lose their crown, and they always sound like a brand new piano. They always had that full force of projection. And remember, we had not the model CC, but we had a model BB that was in here.
Mm-hmm.
And they still have tension rods in those things. Even the CC model did.
Oh yeah, and it adds to the
it's
incredible
just-
weight of the instrument because it just gets bigger as the instrument gets bigger. But yeah, it's holding that sound the soundboard a little bit curved so that just so that the sound and the resonance continues.
That one piano I keep talking about, that BB, wasn't really a store piano. That was one that we were just in transit. Remember, they wanted it set up, and so they would look at it and get it prepped to move to the next place. And when they set it up, it was like, wow, that's a great piano.
Yeah, no, incredible instrument. So the Mason Hamlin Model A makes our list. The next one is one of the sweethearts for you, the Kimball.
That's the one that these have always been referred to as the secret gems or the hidden gems, the real jewels in American piano manufacturing for how much piano and what kind of piano do you get for your money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the one that I always refer to as an American Bosendorfer.
And what was it? It's
the Kimball Viennese 670 model, which I think comes in at about 6'8" or 6'7".
Yeah.
7.
It's the 670. So
it's a 670.
They made it easy for us.
It's just metric, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, the Kimball, it has the imported Schwander action, and it also has a number of the Bosendorfer felts that were imported, and these pianos were designed and built and manufactured
with the help of
with the help of Bosendorfer, but it was their parent company, Kimball, that put their name on it.
Yeah.
And any one of those pianos that I think presumably were used for the 1984 Olympics, the majority of them were Viennese concert grands of different lengths, and they were all that kind of style.
Incredible instruments, yeah. We've seen them all from the 5'8" baby grand all the way up to the 6'7", and they made different sizes. But every time we play one, it's a treat. I think we actually have one in our St. Louis store right now.
Oh, do you?
And I was up there and got to play it. It's one of the smaller ones, but it looks old and dirty and everything. And then you sit down. It had just showed up the day I was there. I sat down and played it, and I was just like, this is
one of the pianos that you take special interest in.
Yeah, no, and it's like it doesn't disappoint.
Right.
It looks like an old antique piano, and you sit down and it doesn't disappoint at all. It's so any of the Viennese really, but the specifically the 670, we feel it's not. Some of the smaller ones are a little gimmicky with the case design with the different.
Right. That's the other thing I was going to tell you. On some of the smaller Viennese Kimball pianos, they put kind of art cases in them, and so they made a lot of pianos that would look a way that someone doesn't want them to look, like a white oak finish.
Hey, it was the 70s, man.
But it was curled up to look like a Louis XIV legs.
It was
or
the
something.
70s. No one knew. No one knows what was going on. And so the Kimball Viennese. 670. This next one was a point of debate.
Yeah, I wanted to say Baldwin Model R based on, because part of my criteria was how popular were these pianos and how often would a regular person, not a classical concert artist or a world touring musician, say, oh, well, if you don't have a Steinway D on there, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Well, we're excluding those because I don't think all of our audience plays 9-foot concert pianos all the time. And so we're trying to think what would be the most impactful, influential pianos that people actually used and encountered and are familiar with. And
so this is a second. This is our first repeat of a manufacturer too, because we had the SF10,
right?
And so now we have the Baldwin model.
We both agreed on a Model R, and then we had some other people come in and say, "Oh, the L's better because the L is bigger," but in terms of influence, if you couldn't get a 7-foot piano, the closest thing you could get to it from Baldwin would be the Model L, and it was a 6'3".
So this one this choice is not a mono choice. It's a stereo choice. It's right and left. It's
right.
R and L.
R and L.
So we've got the Model R and the Model L.
Those were both great pianos. They showed up a lot on recording sessions. A lot of country artists, and of course Liberace and Burt Baccarat, even Billy Joel. A lot of 60s and 70s artists were all Baldwin artists, and those pianos
they're easier to take on the road too.
They're easier to take on the road, and they were more affordable than equivalent other models at the time.
And usually churches, if they were going out to purchase too, they would be making the decision between an R and an L. You know, like, okay, the price, there's a big price jump, but you know, the 5'8" isn't really big enough. A 6'3" could maybe do it. We don't have money for the 7 foot.
And these are pianos that a lot of people were attracted to because of the hammers that Baldwin had. And they had their own wool processing facility. So that every time you sat down at your Baldwin piano, it was just improving more and more in sound, as any other piano would. But they were specifically known for that. That's why they had a large amount of sales to churches.
Yeah. No, and so just, those ones we do see quite frequently. The Model Ls come in. The Model Rs do come in. And they usually, if they haven't been abused too much, they sound incredibly full. But there are a lot of variation on those. But I would say that is one of the most influential pianos that we've seen in the last century. Which brings us to number 8 on the list. And this is the second manufacturer on the list. And so Yamaha, again, gets this one right here, sneaks it in with the C7. So we're full circle back to the 7 foot piano.
Right.
And what's interesting is you look at the history of the C7, and we were talking about this, and the C7 has actually changed sizes. I think it's the only one on our list that has changed sizes with the same model number without any variation on it except serial number changing.
And it depends on the year model. And I've tried to research this, and this is pretty hard to track down.
Yeah.
The C7s, I think, is probably, besides the Steinway B, one of the most recorded pianos, certainly of the last 50 years. During the time that we're talking about, it's probably a top contender in there as well. And the C7 is also probably seen on more combo stages. By that, I mean, if you watch the Oscars, the Academy Awards, if they don't have a 9 foot up there, it'll probably be a C7. And so they're in a lot of studios. They're in a lot of
very
venues.
popular rental.
Very popular rental pianos too. However, it has gone from a 7'2" to a 7'6".
7'4"
with a 7'4" in the middle, and then a 7'6".
Yeah.
And when those changes were incurred is kind of hard to locate.
It's very weird because they just seem to start creeping and getting longer and longer, and so it's an incredible instrument. I would say besides C3s in studios, you see C7s very frequently if they do have the room and space for something a little bit bigger. But yeah, that is our rounded out list right there. That's all 8 of them. That's Steinway Model B, SF10 from Baldwin, the Yamaha C3, Kawai's KG2, Mason Hamlin's Model A, the Kimball Viennese 670, which is a very cool instrument.
It's a neat piano.
Then we have our stereo track, number 7, the Baldwin R and the Baldwin L. And then we have our Yamaha C7 to round it out. Things that we excluded, again, were 9 foot and modern pianos. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, well, what about Fazioli? What about Bosendorfer's Imperial Grand? What about the Steinway Model D and the Mason Hamlin Model CC? And the incredible instruments. But again, 9 foots were not going to make it. The SD10 from Baldwin wasn't going to make it because we were going to exclude those from this conversation. That is probably another list for another time. Those are kind of the crown jewels of instruments. But yeah, so we just wanted to make a list. We also are going to make a top list of uprights to come out. So be sure to subscribe so you get that. Hope you guys enjoy the history of some of these old pianos and the what makes them special. Again, this is the truth. There's no variation from it. We don't believe in talking about it. This is our definitive list. But if you guys disagree, please let us know. Please let us know what your top 8 list would be of pianos manufactured in the 20th century that were influential and, in your opinion, the best. This was our opinion, and thank you again for watching. We're Alamo Music in San Antonio. Find us online at alamomusic.com. Thanks.